All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sunday Social. So, today, of course, is Sunday. I'm Ashley of Day to Day Social Work. Sunday Social is where we meet and talk about all things social work on Sundays. Hey, Edwana. Welcome. So tonight I have some things planned, but I don't plan on this being a very long session. Um, but I do have some things planned. So, first off, I just hope that everybody's been doing well, that everybody's been having a good summer, good end of summer, good time. For those of you who are still studying for the exam, I hope that that's going well for you. If you need any help, please reach out to me. But for me personally, I've had a whole lot of just madness going on in my personal life. So sometimes I feel like coming to do Sunday social, and other times I just don't feel like it. So I didn't do one last week. But today I thought that I would go ahead and do one because I have some information from two trainings that I went to during the week last week. So I went on Monday to a behavioral health training, and they talked mostly about um, a local community response team that's here in the upstate of South Carolina, where they will go into the home. Like if someone's having like a mental health crisis or emergency, then they have a new program here. Again, this is in South Carolina in the upstate, where they will go to the person's home, and they also have workers who will go in and do an assessment with the person who is having the psychiatric crisis, and they will do an assessment and a screening, and they have it where they will respond within 60 minutes. So if anybody listening or anybody who plays this back is in South Carolina in the upstate, this is a new service that they're providing for our community. So if you need the information, I'm going to put it down in the description box at the end of the video. But that's something that, what do you mean 1013? But that's something that I thought was really cool because it's kind of like, if you have a medical emergency, then you would call 911. So if you have a mental health emergency, if someone is experiencing psychosis, or if they are just having like a mental breakdown, you would call this number, and they can go out to the location of the person, whether it's school or at the home or whatever, and they will take care of things immediately. So yeah. So that's one of the things, but then also it was just mostly information about, again, here locally. So I won't, talk about that because I know we have people from all over the country, different states, and it doesn't apply to you. But um, we also had some person first language, and I did a Sunday social, talking about person first language before, but I think it got cut off in the middle while I was talking about it. But of course, if you aren't already aware, which most of us are as social workers, but again, some of us are still going through school, whether it's on the bachelor's level or the master's level, learning about social work. It's very important that we use person first language. Andrea says, does the police go with them? Yes. So the police have to go with them. And I think that is great because, of course, I was a victim advocate, a law enforcement victim advocate, and I thought that they didn't use me as being a social worker um, to their advantage at the police department, because they want to build community and stuff like that, and you have a licensed social worker on your staff, and I was just the victim advocate. Like, they didn't give me a new title, a new position, or just when they hired me, they told me that I would be working on community stuff, but I never did. And so I left because there was no room for advancement. Edwana says a person in crisis would be transported to the hospital. So yeah, so they would go out, whoever would call in, the family member, whoever would call in to the number, and it's like I guess a statewide number or just a local number, and they would talk about the crisis. They can respond on the phone, in person, or video conference, or at the actual center, depending on what time it is and if they're open. If it's after hours, then they would have someone to respond in person or on video call. So they would go out, the clinician would go out and assess. The thing though about this though, was they told us that the therapist did not have to have a license. So it could just be I guess they would even accept someone. Well, I guess they had different criteria, but I just thought that it wasn't wise, I guess, to have someone who wasn't licensed due to the liability of everything, even though you are still liable if you don't have a license. But they said that they had the main person who was over all of the clinicians would be a licensed person. But so yeah, they would go out and do the assessment, and if it was necessary for the person to be transported to the hospital, then yes, they would be transported to the hospital, or they would make an appointment for the person the next business day at 8:30 in the morning if it was something that could hold off. They would make an appointment with the Department of Mental Health for the next business day if it was something that wasn't an emergency that required them to go to the hospital and be admitted. So yeah. But back to the person first language, they gave us this sheet, and I guess that I could find this. I guess I could give y'all this if I can find it online. I can put it in the description box. But it's really like, just saying, of course, we want to put people first and not define people by their disability or their challenge and that kind of thing. So instead of saying, for example, that a person, instead of saying such and such is autistic or the autistic, you would say a person who has autism. Or instead of saying Ashley is deaf and dumb and mute, you would say a person is deaf and cannot speak, who has a speech disorder or uses a communication device or uses synthetic speech. Or instead of saying the blind, you would say a person who is blind or a person who has a visual impairment, or a man or woman has shown low vision, or, things like that. So I won't go through this whole list because, most of us know this, but I will put this, if I can find the link to this paper that they printed us out, I will put that in the description box. But now, most of us may be aware of NAMI. I think NAMI is it's a National Alliance on Mental Illness. Now, some people don't know about NAMI, but that's one of here in this area in the upstate of South Carolina. NAMI is one of those organizations that, some people know about them, some people don't. But they have a lot of resources for, everybody. So I'll put the link to NAMI down in the description box too. Let me make a list here of what I need to put in the description box. So we'll put NAMI, and we will put this person first language sheet. And okay, so they gave us this little card from NAMI, and I know it's probably backwards on the camera, but it's basically communicating with someone who has a psychiatric illness. And when we talk about psychiatric illnesses, we're speaking of, someone who may have bipolar disorder or may have schizophrenia or is experiencing delusional symptoms or paranoia, those kind of things. So I'll go through these really quickly. So it says someone with a psychiatric illness might have trouble with reality. So of course we know that as social workers that people can become delusional or hallucinate, but the average person, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but I guess I say surprisingly because to me it's just common knowledge. But when I talk to like friends or even family members and stuff, they just don't really get it. And so I have to always remember that everybody just does not know this information. So someone with a psychiatric illness might have trouble with reality. Again, to us as social workers, that's the norm. But to the everyday person, they might just think that this person is crazy or whatever. So it says that if someone is having trouble with reality, you need to be simple and truthful. So, and that's another reason why I think it's good that, they're coming up with these programs where social workers are going in with police officers to deal with mental health challenges and crises and stuff like that, because we know the things to look for. And it seems that they would kind of train officers, and I guess they do, but when I worked in the police department, I don't know that they trained all police officers. I know they had like a community response team who they trained specific officers to deal with mental illness and, you know, those kind of crisis situations. But it was a team of a certain number of people, and it wasn't everybody. So of course, when you have a situation that an officer is just going into, and if they're not part of that community response team, or if they haven't been trained, they might just be looking at a situation as a normal person, and they might not pick up on those signs or those cues that someone is having a mental health crisis. And so, you know, we had a lady in the training. She was a police officer for, I think she said 15 or 20 plus years. And she did our training and basically just gave us the training that she gives the officers. It's called a crisis intervention training. And she actually worked for NAMI too. And so she's the one that trains the officers here locally to respond to these kind of situations. But if a person is having trouble with reality, you need to be simple and truthful. We don't need to, of course, you try to be smart alecky and stuff like that. If you recognize that this person is having, you know, a challenge, then you need to use simple language. We don't need to use, you know, they say that you should communicate on like a third grade level with your language. And so you want to be simple, you want to be truthful. I remember she told us not to tell, you know, lies or make promises to anybody. So if you tell the person that you are going to take them to, you know, if a person is experiencing, let's say, some delusions and they're in their 40s, but they are telling you that they are actually 4 years old and they're acting like a 4-year-old, and they're giving you delusional statements that make you think that, yes, something is going on with this person. You don't want to say, well, if you put down the bat, then I promise you I'll take you to McDonald's, and then you don't actually take them. That's, you know, an example of not being truthful to that person. So the lady told us to always be truthful and don't make promises that you don't intend on keeping when you're dealing with someone in a crisis situation. It says someone with a psychiatric illness might be fearful, so you want to stay calm. They might be insecure, so you want to be accepting. They may have trouble concentrating. That's another big thing, because if someone is having cognitive dissonance, or if they are having trouble with thinking or speaking, and they're trying to get their thoughts and things together, you definitely want to be patient. And you want to be patient, and you want to show compassion. You want to show concern. You want to make your conversation with the person relatable and be personable with the person. So you definitely want to build a rapport with the person using their name. So you want to, and this is the thing, people who have crisis situations are people just like everybody else, but sometimes they are psychotic, they are experiencing psychosis, and which means that they could be hearing voices and you don't know what the voices are telling them. So I'm not saying to just appease the person 100%. You definitely want to stay alert, because, and the lady also told us that if someone is hearing voices, you want to make sure you ask them what the voices are saying, because the voices could be telling them to hurt you. And so you always want to be, you know, alert. You want to make sure that you are aware of your surroundings. And again, this is the training that she gave to the police officers, but it could go for anybody, because of course you definitely want to be aware. And I remember on a couple Sunday socials ago, I told you all about a past client that I had who was experiencing psychosis, and a colleague and I had to take her to the hospital. And she had been to the hospital before to be admitted into an inpatient treatment, and she did not want to go back. And so when she realized that we were taking her there for an evaluation, she became physical and combative. And my first instinct as a 23-year-old green new social worker was to like grab her and keep her from running out of the place. And that was not the right thing to do. That wasn't a good idea. But again, I didn't know any better. And so afterwards, my colleague was like, Ashley, why did you do that? Why would you try to stop her from leaving? She could have done this, this, and this. And I was just like, I wasn't thinking, but why didn't you tell me that in the moment? So make sure that you cover your colleagues if they are doing something that you don't think is safe, because I was being reactionary in that situation. Like, it was just like reflex. Like, I knew she needed help. I wanted to get her help. She didn't want to be involuntarily admitted, but that was what was going to happen. And my first instinct was just to stop her from leaving, and it wasn't a safe thing to do. So what should I have done in that situation? I don't know. I mean, they had security there. I don't know if the security person was around, because I didn't look to see. It was just me being ignorant, lacking the knowledge of what to do. And, honestly, I still don't know what I would have done differently in that situation at that time, because she was jetting out of there. Like, when she looked around and realized that this was the place she had been before and she didn't want to be there, she jetted. And I mean, I didn't know if she was going to run out into the road. And she was definitely experiencing psychosis. And I definitely did not handle that situation right at all. But tell me what y'all think I should have done. You can leave it in the comments. And if we're still on here after I'm done talking about all this other stuff, then I will read what you think the right thing would be to do. I mean, the lady, if I'm not mistaken, she might have had schizophrenia, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that she was ever diagnosed with it, but I think that it was a history in her family. And again, being that young and that new to the profession, I didn't have access to her medical records and stuff like that. We didn't have access to any of that stuff. So I can only assume that she had that she was a person with schizophrenia or some other mental health challenge, mental illness. So, but yeah, that just wasn't the right way to handle it. And I kind of thought, about my colleague, and I was like, why didn't you stop me? But anyway, so what else is on here? Someone with a psychiatric illness might be overstimulated, so you want to limit your input. It says they may become easily agitated, and you want to be able to recognize the agitation. So I think that's important too, because like I said, the person that I'm thinking about, she was definitely agitated, and I knew she was, but my response was not the correct response. And again, I still don't know what I would have done differently. They may have poor judgment, so don't expect a rational discussion or rational behaviors from this person. They may be preoccupied. Again, they may have voices in their mind or in their heads. So you need to make sure that you get their attention before you try to talk with them. And when I did my internship while in grad school, it was with the Department of Mental Health. And a lot of people there were not in touch with reality. Mostly everyone there had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And most of them were just off to the side doing their own thing. You would see people listening to their voices, having conversations with their voices. They would be like, and I never figured this out. There was always a lady who would just touch stuff. Like she would just touch the table, and she would make squares on the table with her hands and her fingers, and she would not pay attention to anybody, and she would just touch stuff. And I always wondered like why that was. And so I asked someone, and they said it was her way of being connected to reality. I don't know if that was necessarily true, but that's what the professional at the time told me, was that was her way of being in touch with reality, was making sure that she touched things and that she rubbed on hard surfaces. Now, again, I don't know if that was necessarily the case, but who am I? Who am I? It just seemed like I guess it could have been the case. I don't know. But anyway, it says that a person may be withdrawn, so you want to initiate relevant conversation. They may have changing emotions, which of course we know that to be true because, you know, they could be up, they could be down, they could be crying, they could be laughing at inappropriate times, they could be crying at times where they should be happy. So it could be just a plethora of different emotions. So you want to make sure that you don't disregard them. They have changing plans. They have little empathy for you. That's another one because, you know, most of the time when people are coherent and they're not experiencing psychosis, then they probably are more empathetic. But when they have a slip of the mind, then they might not be empathetic for you. And like I said, the client that I was just speaking about, any other time, she's okay. But, you know, she was very aggressive when she found out that she was going into the hospital. And she was so strong, like the strength was way out of what I thought. It was way different than I thought it would be, but she was very strong. And, you know, I'm kind of small. I was even smaller back then. It's like 10 years ago. But she did not have any regard for me at all. Like physically, all she thought about was getting out of there. She didn't want to stay. So, and then it says that they may believe delusions. So you just want to ignore and don't argue with their delusions. And I always take a time to explain the difference between delusions and hallucinations whenever we talk about either or, because some people don't know the difference. So delusions are things that could happen that probably didn't happen. And so if someone is being delusional, they are thinking about something happening that probably didn't happen. So let's say that a person who is delusional is telling me that they won the lottery last night and they won $500 million. It's possible that it could happen, but probably not likely. That's a delusion. Someone telling me that they ride the bus home every day and that former President Obama rides the bus with them on a daily basis back home. Could happen, but probably didn't. Someone telling me that they got a promotion and they're now the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but they actually are just the secretary in the company as of yesterday. And then today they're telling me that they're the president and CEO of a Fortune 500 company. That's a delusion because it could happen, but probably didn't. So hallucinations deal with your senses. That's when you see things, hear things, smell things, taste things, feel things that aren't there. So of course, seeing people that aren't there, shadows and things like that aren't there is a hallucination. Hearing the voices is a hallucination. Tasting, I've never heard anybody tell me that they had a hallucination where they're tasting something that's not there. Smelling things that aren't there, like maybe something's burning, but nobody else smells that. And then feeling things that aren't there, like it feels like your skin is crawling, like you have ants and stuff all over you, but there is nothing there. That could be a hallucination as well, or it could be true. But, you know, for someone that's experiencing psychosis, that would be an example of that. So it says proceed to interact as you be calm and give firm, clear instructions. Assess the situation for safety. Always, always, always make sure the situation is safe. Maintain adequate space between you and the person. And that is very important for us as social workers because a person could be calm if they're experiencing psychosis or some other form of mental illness that causes them not to be in their normal state or a state that's typical for a person that's similar to them. Then, you know, they could be calm 1 second and then they might hear a voice that tells them to hit you. And you want to make sure you maintain adequate space between you and that person so that you can avoid that and so that you can be prepared in case something goes down. Respond to apparent feelings, respond to delusions and hallucinations by talking about the person's feelings rather than what he is saying, and be helpful and encouraging and supportive. And it says that you want to avoid reinforcing behavior related to the person's illness, staring at the person as they may interpret that as a threat. So I could see how that could be something that's legit. So if a person is experiencing a mental health crisis, don't stare at them, because then they might see it as a threat and as a challenge. And I know some people are staring because they want to know what's going on, or they might be in shock because they've never seen anything like this before. But you definitely don't want to stare a person down because most people without psychosis, if you keep staring at them, they're going to look at you like, what are you looking at and what's going on? They might even see that as a threat or a challenge. You want to avoid confusing the person, and you want to avoid giving multiple choices, as this increases confusion. So you don't want to ask several questions at once either, because that's going to increase confusion. And, if you ask 3 questions, like, what's the make, model, and year of your car? Most people are going to tell you, with, people who don't have that cognitive ability at the moment are probably going to either answer the very last part of the question, or the very last question that you asked, or they're just going to sit there and try to think like, okay, what did you just say? And they want to make sure that they answer everything. So it says you also want to avoid whispering, yelling, ridiculing, deceiving, or touching, because this may cause more fear and lead to violence. So yeah, especially if a person is paranoid and you're whispering, they may think that you're talking about them, or they may see that as a threat. Yelling, of course, is gonna stimulate them and make the situation maybe worse than what it is. You don't want to ridicule or deceive a person, regardless if they are psychotic or not. And then touching. So that's just this. I'm going to put the link down here to NAMI, which again is a national organization, National Alliance on Mental Illness. Okay, so that's that. I wish I could let y'all see these PowerPoint slides from the training that we had. Let's see if there's anything else on here that I need to talk about. Well, she has a video on here, and I'll put the link to this video. I think it's a documentary or something like that. Let's see. Watch, and it says watch body language of a person. Of course, you want to do that. Watch your tone of voice. Oh, and then also asking the S question. And I'm going to say S because YouTube will flag the video if I say the actual word, but you know what word I'm talking about, hopefully. You always want to ask that question and be prepared for the answer, is what they said. So a lot of people are afraid of the S question. And if you don't know what the S question is, I'll put the S word in the description box below when I post the video. But we have to be very comfortable with asking that question. Yes, Edwana, facial expressions too. We have to be very comfortable with asking the S question, because some people won't tell you if you don't directly ask. And you have to be direct with the question. And again, because YouTube will flag the video and they might even not even post it if I say the word, but be prepared for the answer. So know what you're going to do if the person says, yes, I am S, or I have a plan, or I've thought about this. This is what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it. What are you going to do next? Are you going to get them to the hospital? Are you going to call the crisis hotline? Are you going to call for assistance from law enforcement or somebody else? And I say that I'm very wary. I'm just going to be honest. I'm very wary about calling law enforcement when someone is having a mental health crisis, because of the lack of training of some officers in some departments, they don't understand the threat. Now, there may not be a threat. There may be a threat, but if you're not trained, you don't know how to act in certain situations. And of course, we want everybody to be safe. We want everybody to go home at the end of the day and be healthy and well. But it's just scary sometimes to think that that this person is going through a crisis, but they might not know, and they might see a sudden move as a threat. And then next thing you know, we have an even more serious problem. So I'm just very wary of it because I don't want anything bad to happen to anybody. But, sometimes we have to do that. But that's when you come in as a social worker and you are the advocate for that person, and you explain to them when they get there or while they're on the way there that this person is not violent. If they're not violent, if they are violent, let them know. So, everybody needs to be safe. But, if they're a nonviolent person, if you know this person because you work with them, and, you can't predict the behavior, though, of somebody who may have a very severe crisis going on. But, if your dealings with the person have not been violent, let them know that they're not a violent person, that the person, that, make sure that you bring them in with enough information to know that this person is probably not a threat. Again, they're going to assess the situation from their training and stuff like that. And if it becomes a threat, then they'll handle it accordingly. But just make sure that you give enough information to advocate for this person who can't advocate for themselves right now due to their mental state. And that's just all I'll say about that. It says never leave the person alone. Of course, if somebody, especially if they tell you that they are we don't want to leave them alone. We don't want to give them any time by themselves because we want to keep the person safe, and we want to make sure we know where they are. So if you leave and come back and they're not there, now we have another problem because we don't know where they are, and we don't know, if the situation has heightened or whatever. Okay, so restraining someone, again, I wouldn't recommend it. I did that before, as I just said a few minutes ago, but, don't do that. That's not the right thing to do. Watch the person's hands. Again, this is what the lady trains people who are in law enforcement on, but again, it also is helpful for just the average person. Make sure you watch their hands. The lady told us that a person who is in a crisis like this, 9 times out of 10, if they're going to hurt you, it's going to be with their hands. It's not going to be with a weapon or an object. And if it is, then you definitely want to watch their hands also in that instance to see if they have anything, because they might pick something up or something like that. Let's see. Never deny the possibility of violence. So again, I'm not saying for you to just go in here and just be willy-nilly. Always assess the situation, always be safe, but just know that we are advocating for this person who is not in their norm right now. Remove objects or persons of distraction. So if you and your colleague are on the scene with a person who has a mental illness crisis, and let's say that they're comfortable with talking to you, but they keep looking at your colleague like with the funny eyes, they keep staring at the person, and you can read from their facial expressions that they might see this person as a threat. You want to remove that person from being a distraction or from possible harm. So you want to just say, okay, well, let's go over here and talk, or ask your colleague to go sit in the car or go into the building or whatever. If you can tell that that's something that's distracting the person based off of everything. So you're constantly assessing a situation. And again, this is for people who are in crisis. This is for people who are currently experiencing psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, a crisis situation. This is not just a person who has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder or a person who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. They're normal people like everybody else. They don't necessarily have to be experiencing psychosis or anything like that. They're normal people just like us. So I'm not saying that these are the things you need to do around somebody with this disorder. No, I'm saying if a person is in crisis and they're currently experiencing hallucinations, delusions, they're psychotic and that kind of thing. And I feel kind of funny saying psychotic because I guess the way that people in regular society that are not social workers, they say psychotic and it's usually meant as a bad thing. But when I say psychotic, if it's bothering anybody, I mean a person who is experiencing psychosis. And I'm not saying that they're crazy, but literally they're experiencing psychosis and they have a cognitive dysfunction going on at the time where they're experiencing hallucinations or delusions. Yeah, so that's that on dealing with a person with a crisis, a mental illness crisis. Now, the fun stuff that I like, as y'all know, I said the last time we had Sunday Social that I want to do something in law enforcement again as a social worker. And so on Tuesday last week, I went to a victim witness intimidation training because I'm still a victim service provider. And if you saw my victim advocate video from a few years back, I showed you the little card that they give us, and we have to maintain a certain number of hours every year in order to stay active as a victim service provider. So I went to this training not only to help me in my current job, because this stuff can help any social worker, which is why I'm talking about it, but also to maintain my hours as a victim service provider. So this one was put on by solicitors, attorneys, law enforcement, and all of those people in that kind of area. So it was basically about how people who are victims of crime, specifically domestic violence, sexual assault, can be harassed and intimidated by their perpetrator, their aggressor, their offender, the defendant, and all the other synonymous terms that we call these people. So first thing I want to talk about is here in South Carolina, they call it the Department of Crime Victim Compensation. In different states, they call it different things. Here in South Carolina, they used to call it the State Office of Victim Assistance. But now, like I said, they changed it to the Department of Crime Victim Compensation. Every state, I believe, should have something similar where if a person is a victim of a crime, they have an office, a department that will compensate the victim for their injuries, damages, if they are a victim of a crime. This is the, let me close this blinds in case somebody's in here, out here trying to peep. Anyway, so I used to have to fill these out a lot when I was a victim advocate. And it's basically if a person had any medical, dental, vision bills because they were a victim of an assault or harassment, then they could be reimbursed for their bills, or they could have their bills paid by this office. If they had crime-related counseling, they could be reimbursed by this office. If they had to have medication for injuries sustained, they could be reimbursed. And if they had lost wages, they could be reimbursed. And if a family member was a victim of a homicide, then they could also be reimbursed for funeral expenses. Again, I would say make sure you check with your state to know what this office is called, but it's basically crime victim compensation. So you might want to Google your state and crime victim compensation or something like that. But normally what they do is they will pay for, like I said, all of those expenses. So let's say that you were the victim of a hit and run accident. Well, I guess you could call it an accident, but that's a crime, hit and run. And your jaw was displaced and you had to get dentures or whatever. They would pay for that, but you have to use your health insurance, dental insurance and stuff first. So that's the thing. You have to use what you have first. And if you don't, they are basically a payer of last resort. So if, let's say that someone, and this is not just domestic violence or sexual assault, if you were, let's say, robbed at gunpoint, and hopefully YouTube won't flag me. I'm very cautious of the words I use now because we talk about a lot of stuff like this and YouTube will flag the video. I'm learning. But let's say that someone was robbed at gunpoint or, you know, and it really traumatized them. And you look at their medical record, they never had a history of any other kind of treatment for trauma. Then this person could go to counseling and this office would pay for it. Let's see. And they have qualifications. Like this says that it has to be filed within 12 months of the date of service. It says they provide reimbursement for trauma, generally considered as a medical expense, only when such service is rendered by a professional who is licensed in a specialty, which includes mental health counseling. This includes LMSW when not practicing independently, LPC, LMFT, LCSW, LISW, psychiatrist, psychologist, and MD. So they do have certain things that you have to do. Or let's say that the person needs medication because, again, maybe they had their jaw broken and they need pain meds. This office would pay for the pain meds. Lost wages. So let's say that the person's so traumatized they can't go to work because something reminds them of what happened and they need some time off of work. They will reimburse for the lost wages, and they do it if you are employed by somebody and also if you are self-employed. So they will, it says, if you were self-employed at the time of the crime, the victim must have been employed at the time of the crime, missed time from work. The victim must have missed 2 consecutive weeks, 14 days from work as a direct result of the crime. And it's reportable income. And the victim must be under the care of a treating physician. So it's not that you can just go and get this stuff. Like you have to meet the criteria. So make sure you check out whatever your state office of Department of Crime Victim Compensation is in your state so that you can know about this. Like a lot of people don't know about this. I didn't know about this until I worked at the police department. I didn't really have a reason to know about it, but I'm glad that I know about it now. So make sure you check that out. Now, last things, because I don't want to be on here too long tonight. We talked about, victim witness intimidation. Most people who work in this area of social work as a victim advocate, or, if you are an advocate at a rape crisis center or something similar, then you probably have heard about all this stuff. If you haven't, then it's good to know about and recognize these signs and things like that. And just because you don't work in an area of law enforcement, or if you don't work in a rape crisis center, this is still good information for you to know, because I work in a hospital and I deal with children who have a chronic medical condition and their families. And a lot of times the children and their family members have experienced some kind of trauma, some kind of crime. A lot of times they do experience some kind of sexual crime, I'm finding. So it's good to have this information because you work with people who are in crisis and people who need you at a point in their life when they are low. And so just like any other person, whether they're low or they're high, all of us have something that we've been through. And, whether it's you're working in medical and you deal primarily with people with medical conditions, they also still have other life issues too. So, I have a patient whose mom, I have a couple patients, their moms are survivors of domestic violence and are currently going through situations. So even though I'm not a victim advocate, I still work with people who can benefit from this information. So one of the main things I wanted to talk about, though, is the Victims' Bill of Rights. And this, I only know about the state of South Carolina because, I'm in the state of South Carolina. But your state should have a state constitution that has a Victim Bill of Rights. And normally the Victim Bill of Rights says that the victim should have access to a fair and speedy, process. I won't say trial, but process. The victim has a right to know when the bond hearing is. The victim has a right to not be harassed or intimidated by the offender, whether that's directly or indirectly. The victim has a right to know when the offender is released from jail or prison. So the victims have a lot of rights. And I have I had an example, but it's somewhere in that folder that I didn't bring out here with me. But anyway, so there's also federal statutes that also apply to some of the stuff that I'm not going to get into because I don't want to give incorrect information. But I'm going to put some stuff down in the description box in case you want to check it out and find out on your own about the federal part of it. So the dynamics of domestic violence and victim witness intimidation. So intimidating a victim or a witness, just plain day-to-day language, is, harassing someone, calling them, trying to get them not to testify against you, trying to get them to drop the charges, threatening you if you don't, threatening your family or contacting your family or some other third party to get to you if you have a restraining order or order of protection against the person. These are kind of tactics that people use to intimidate a victim of a crime or a witness to a crime. And of course, it's usually the offender who's doing this. And so during the training, they let us listen to an audio recording of someone calling from jail. They called, I guess, a friend, and then the friend called a victim's mother on three-way. And then this offender tried to get information out of the mother about what was going on. So it could be physical, threats of violence. It could be damage to a person's property, like, just trying to send a clear message that if you cooperate with this process, then something bad is going to happen to you. So it could be, I'm trying to think of an example that they told us about. One example that they gave us was there was a couple and it was domestic violence, and the couple was Hispanic and the male was the perpetrator, because we know that females can be perpetrators too. So I don't want to just, make any assumptions, but the male was the perpetrator and the female, she wasn't documented in the country. And so he knew that, but he was. And he went to court and he had a cup of ice and he wrote ice on the styrofoam cup in a black Sharpie marker and was like shaking the cup towards her and like looking at her and stuff like that. That's intimidation. Like, he knew that she was not documented here. She was not here legally. And he knew that that was a direct threat that's kind of intimidating her to be like, if you cooperate, then I'm going to tell that you're not documented or whatever. Also, it's important to know that even when someone is not here legally, they still have some rights. And there's also the U visa. Now, when I worked at the police department, I did come across some victims of domestic violence who were not here legally, and they were signing up to get a U visa. Now, if you don't know what the U visa is, I don't want to give any incorrect information because it's been a while since I worked in that area, but it's basically a visa to allow the person to stay here during this process. And I will put information about the U visa in the description box as well. So, this is just stuff that I like to pass along to y'all because it's stuff that you can benefit from, even if you don't work in the criminal justice field on a regular basis. So not me person first, the U visa and the victim bill of rights. And I'll make sure I get that for y'all. Anyway, so it can also be psychological threats. Again, being in the courtroom, staring a person down, that's the victim. Using hand signals that only you and the person know, or using mouthing words, doing that kind of thing. It could also be social media. So we know that a lot of people who are in jail or prison have access to social media. I don't know how. And, they have access to cell phones and stuff like that. So they can easily get on social media and harass the victim, intimidate the victim. Emotional manipulation from jail calls. So they have this software where they can listen to jail calls, of course. But it's like they told us about the software where the software picks up on the conversation and they rate it by color. So if it's green, then it's probably not something that needs to be brought to anybody's attention. If it's yellow, then they may have said some words that might be a little sketchy. Maybe you want to listen to this call. If it's red, then this is definitely something that you want to listen to. So, just knowing about this kind of stuff, I think is helpful. Of course, another psychological one is, the offender telling the victim, if you testify or if you keep these charges against me, then you're going to ruin my life, or I'm going to complete S, or, I love you, this will never happen again. All the stuff that normally happens in the cycle of abuse as far as the honeymoon stage goes, and the love bombing and that kind of thing. Let's see. So some of the things that they do to kind of try to lower these instances of the victim and the offender being in the same space when it comes to court is like having separate courtrooms, setting everything at the bond hearing, such as like if they have children together, then they will set the visitation for the children to go through a third party, so that the offender doesn't have to contact them at all, to try to see their children, because we know some people will use their children to try to get to the victim. What else? Let's see. Oh, also they will, the judge will allow the offender one chance to go to the home with law enforcement escort to get their things from the home. One visit, no more. But there's always ways around that. So and this as a person who works with victims, as the social worker would, you just knowing if you have to listen out to what your client is telling you. Even if, like I said, if you work in a hospital and you have a rapport bit with this person, you see that they're distressed, you ask them what's going on, they let you know that they're in the process of all of this. These are the kind of things that you want to let the person be aware of that can help them. Like, that they can call to the solicitor's office and tell them that they're being harassed by phone call from the offender who's in jail, and they can get the offender's number blocked or get their call privileges revoked. What else? Let's see. I took some notes because I knew I was going to talk about this tonight. And then there's also the threat of housing. So, if you are under HUD housing, which is the Housing and Urban Development on the federal level, then if there's an act called VAWA, and I've talked about this in a previous video before, but it's the Violence Against Women Act. And there's another one called VOCA, and I can't remember what that acronym stands for. But VAWA and VOCA are enacted to protect people from, well, I won't say VOCA because I can't remember what VOCA is for, but VAWA is in place to protect victims and give them certain rights. And, if a victim is in like we call it Section 8 here. I don't know if that's a federal or state program, but if they're under housing, as we call it, or under HUD, and they are a victim of domestic violence, and there's a threat that they may be put out of their home, there are safeguards in place under VAWA where that would not happen. They can be transferred to another place, but they can't be evicted because of the domestic violence. Now, if they did something else, then that's different. But, the landlord couldn't say, oh, well, you're a victim, you got to get out, basically. So I'll put some information on VAWA down. I'm going to give y'all a lot of information. I'm not going to just sit here and talk about a lot of it because I know y'all don't want to hear me ramble on. But anyway, so I'll put some information about VOCA and VAWA. And then it's also important to know the differences between a restraining order and an order of protection. Restraining orders are normally for people who have never lived together. Maybe they were in a relationship and then they had some kind of incident, domestic violence or whatever, depending on your state, of course. And they don't want the person calling them or contacting them, so they might get a restraining order. Are you on Instagram? I am on Instagram, but not as day-to-day social work. I don't have a day-to-day social work Instagram, but I do have a day-to-day social work Facebook page and Facebook group. So if you want to go on there, you can type in day-to-day social work. But so the restraining order is kind of like a lower version of the order of protection. Order of protection affords you a lot more protection, even though, you know, people would argue that both of them are just a piece of paper. And in a lot of instances, it is, because some people, they don't care about order of protection or restraining order. If they're going to do whatever they're going to do, they're going to do it. But it's still something to encourage, because not everybody is that bold and are going to just try to disregard, you know, the restraining order or the order of protection. But the order of protection is for families. It can help the I'm not going to say the mother, but the victim, because we know the victim can be a father as well. It can help with the custody of the children. It affords a whole lot more protection than a restraining order. And so I'm going to give y'all information on the differences, and I'll put this in the description box too. So restraining orders and order of protection. And I don't know that they're different in each state. I just know for South Carolina, because that's where I'm from. But again, I don't know that the requirements are different in different states. But I'll put some information down there. So then they also told us about anti-slapp, which I don't know if that's a formal name for this, but it's basically where if a couple is married, they can't use the court system to harass, the offender can't use the court system to harass the victim. So even though they're not supposed to have any contact with the victim and they're married, they might try to file like a civil suit against their spouse, which is different from the criminal suit or the criminal case. And, you know, they could say, well, I'm taking you to court for the house or whatever. So they have what they call anti-slapp. And I didn't even get a chance to look it up, but I'm gonna look into that too and put that down below too. So they have that in place where, you know, the offender can't use the system to the court system to stalk or harass the victim. I don't know what's beeping or dinging on my computer, but I'm not gonna look at it. Anyway, let's see. Leva goes home to the home. Oh, and also, you know, if you are a law enforcement victim advocate, honestly, when I was a victim advocate, I was kind of scared at first, because I'm like, so we're gonna be dealing with like offenders who might not be happy that I'm helping the victim. So it was kind of scary at first, but you know, when I work at the police department, they gave me a car, so I didn't have to drive my own car. So that was good. It kind of helped relieve me from being afraid. I had a Crown Vic. I liked that car. It was big, and they put gas in it for us, and they did all the maintenance on it, and you could drive it whenever you wanted to, and it was great. But anyway, so just keep in mind, if you are thinking about going into a victim advocate role, that sometimes all the time, you need to be aware, especially if you go to court with people, because in the training that I went to, mostly everybody there was either a victim advocate or they were law enforcement. And they were saying that they've had offenders like chase them or not chase them, but follow them to court while they had the victim in the car. And that was part of the job, was that if the victim didn't have a way to court, then because we had these issued cars, we could go and pick them up and take them to court. So just be, and we were not allowed to carry any weapons or anything like that. So just be aware, you know, of who these offenders are, and, you know, be aware of your surroundings. And if you feel like somebody's following you, then don't go home to your house. Don't take the victim to their house. Like, go straight to law enforcement, to the law enforcement center, or, you know, somewhere that's going to be safe for you and the victim. Not to scare anybody, not to scare anybody out of being a victim advocate, because I was never threatened. I was there for 2 years. I was never threatened or anything like that. I think it was just me being in my own mind about, you know, somebody potentially just following me from court or something like that, because I'm always hypervigilant. But anyway, so it says factors increasing intimidation risk: the violent nature of the initial crime, the victim's previous personal connection to the defendant, the geographic proximity to the defendant, vulnerability of the victim. So are they a part of a group that's easily victimized, like the elderly or children, or illegal immigrants? Shared parenting is another one that would increase the intimidation risk, because of course, if you have children together, you kind of have to deal with the person in some kind of way at some point. Let's see. So this was about, so I wanted to tell y'all about the lethality. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, but the lethality assessment, which you may or may not have heard of, but it's basically, it was, I guess, Jacqueline Campbell came up with this out of Johns Hopkins. But it's basically where I don't know if it's the police department or the solicitor's office or what, but they review all of the homicides that occurred due to domestic violence. And they look at what could have been done differently to help the victim. So I'm going to put information on that too. And unless you like this kind of criminal justice kind of stuff like I do, it might not be of any interest to you. But I don't know why. I've always wanted to do something in law enforcement, which is why I wanted to do victim advocate. But I kind of want to do forensic interviews at this point. So at some point, I'm going to end up doing that. But if this criminal justice stuff doesn't appeal to you, I'm sorry, but I like it. Let's see, what else? I know it's been an hour, so I'm going to get off here in a few minutes here. But, you know, they also have that system. I don't know if it's statewide or if it's nationwide, but it's called SAVIN, SAVIN, where, you know, if someone is in prison and they're moved for any reason, then the victim is notified via automated phone call. So if the offender is in prison and they get sick and they have to go to an infirmary, then the victim will get a call. And then when they get back to the prison, they get another call. If the offender has to go to a hearing somewhere, then the victim can be notified of that. Like any kind of movement that the offender has, the victim is made aware of that, basically. So that's that. I'm not going to keep going on and on. I think I hit the high points, and I will leave you some information. You're welcome, Edwana. Okay, so I'm going to look on Facebook and see if anybody has any questions or comments. I don't know that Facebook was even going. I don't know what's going. Okay. So anyway, yeah, it was. All right. So that's that for tonight. Any questions or comments? Remember, if you recently joined the Facebook group last week, you were included in a post on Friday. So if you want the 45-day access to the pre-recorded tutoring series, that's on special for you until tonight at 11:59 Eastern Standard Time. If you need any tutoring, if you have any questions about anything related to social work, anything, just let me know. My email address and the link to the website and the link to The YouTube page are always in the description box. If you have any topics that you want me to cover for Sunday Social, let me know. If you have any questions, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, because these Sunday Socials, there's a lot of good information in these Sunday Socials, in addition to all the videos that I've made over the years to help you prepare for the license exam. So for those of you who are new, welcome. Day-to-day social work is primarily to help you prepare for your license exam, whether it's on the bachelor's or master's level, whether it's clinical, the advanced clinical license also. But also it's just about all things social work. So make sure you check out the channel, subscribe, browse through the videos, and see what can be helpful for you. Share with your colleagues, like the video, share the videos. And if you have anything to contribute, then let me know. So I hope y'all have a great week. And as always, thank you for the work that you do. I know sometimes social workers aren't thanked for the work that we do because people don't understand our profession. They don't really understand what we do. But I know that if you are a social worker, you definitely are helping people and you're making a difference in people's lives. And I thank you for that. So until next time, I will see you all later. Any questions you have, just email me or leave them in the comment section. Have a good week and have a good night.